So we're finally here. After a year of revisiting Death Battle, we're finally caught up. So let's end this series once and for all. It's time to rank Season 10 of Death Battle!
Can't hold on much longer. I will never let go. I know it's one way track. Tell me now, how long is the last? Simple curiosity, trying to take a mind of me. Let me show you just what I'm made of now. Hanging on the edge of tomorrow. Once against the edge. This life, there's no room for you and me. So turn away your face and stay with me.
Dailies and mental gin. This has truly been a very long and roundabout path. But this is the final stop of our Death Battle retrospective. Those who have been subscribed throughout this journey, show off your bragging rights in the comments and multiply them by the first season ranking you watched from me with this chart here. I think we can all agree that Season 10 of Death Battle has been one solid collection of the show's greatest moments. Getting to this point may have been a rocky first 4 seasons, and even once it got to the top, there were still some slip-ups here and there. But look at us now. We're done with the slipping. We're effortlessly skating all the figure eights because this season has been the best time to be a Death Battle fan, where they finally achieved that perfect balance between quality and consistency. With all the blithering punks is getting rightfully clowned on for doubting this show's ability to get better until they made the best season of the show straight up. Are people saying this due to recency bias? That might be the case for some people, but I'll go forth and say that this was undeniably the hardest season for me to rank. So many episodes got switched around in my ranking, so many episodes required multiple full revisits from me, and so many episodes of untapped yet comparable quality. So by default, not only do we have some good content to look at, but some super smoking hot takes here and there. Believe me, I've got some big ones cooking, but for now, let's waste no more time and get into the season premiere. All I gotta say right now is thank God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit that Akuma-con was not the last time I got one of my most wanted. Yeah, Ant-Man vs. the Atom was easily the Marvel vs. DC episode I was looking forward to the most. Yes, this makes me something of a self-proclaimed free thinker myself, but can you blame me though? Not only did it have so much fun animation potential, but also a lot of interesting tidbits you could cover with the analysis. Their vast studies and knowledge of science, how they work it into their power sets, it's all there, and it's all such ripe material for Death Battle. And going into Hank's analysis, I was right, because this is just my favorite analysis of a Marvel character ever, aside from Nito, of course. But this one has a lot to love about it. You can tell right away just with how it looks and how it's edited. This was DJ Tiki's first episode as an editor following Nervous Nick's leave, and yeah, he knocked it out of the park. There's a plethora of motion graphics and RGB effects on top of the usual top-notch comic book editing to keep the viewer engaged. Even if there's not as much masking as in some of Nick's edits, that's just a difference of editing style. And in terms of the writing, this single analysis has some of my favorite writing of the season, specifically because of how Wiz and Boomstick are utilized here. I've talked about their personalities and how they play off of each other quite a few times, and I still stand that they're very good hosts, but there are times where it just feels like they don't know how to write Boomstick very well. I've always believed that their dynamic is at its best when discussing the scientific facts of feats and abilities in ways that let both shine, and Hank's analysis is proof of that. Boomstick being used as a means of helping the viewer understand what's going on just works really well here. The science that they talk about is very complex, so they have Boomstick not just simplifying it for the audience, but also has him understand it with the audience, via the bagel pizza metaphor. Some people might find this running gag annoying and okay, but I can at least understand why it's here. It also starts to offend Wiz to a degree, because according to him, science is all that he has left. I was kind of weirded out by this at first, because I never would have expected Wiz to be offended by Boomstick finding science to be easily accessible to him, given that he's been aware that Boomstick has a doctorate of his own, but recently I've been theorizing that it might might be meant to pay homage to the Hank-related struggles that they bring up in his analysis, by virtue of having Wiz literally go through those same struggles himself. And even then, Boomstick never really outshines Wizard in the science department because, buddy, your glasses are upside down. I just love this attention to detail. It's such a fun visual gag. And then we get to the part where they go into his wife-beating phase, which is often memed across the Versus community for some reason, but they build it up by talking about his insecurities and instances of being bullied, as well as how his successes periodically went to his head. You know, with how those feelings of inadequacy eventually came back. At no point do they excuse the beatings. Instead, they use it as a means of saying how it was bad, but then they go into how he needed to learn how to better himself, improve the world around him, and eventually pass down the mantle to Scott Lang. And they're also interwoven with his abilities and feats very naturally, albeit to a point where they don't bring up any numbers, but then the corner boxes basically confirm that this was not supposed to be the case, though I do kind of wish it was, especially since, skipping ahead a bit, the conclusion is heavily based around abilities rather than stats. But to compensate for that, to me at least, you have several Ant names like Ant Hathaway and Vince Ant Van Gogh. Yes. Seriously though, hats off to Joshua for this one. You really knocked it out of the park. Oh, and here's a part where Hank called Reed Richards a bitch. I have no words. I just can't stop laughing at this. As for the Adams analysis, I feel like it was better and worse in contrasting ways. To start off, the editing was a lot better. That comic book editing has such a satisfying flow to it, and there are a lot more masking effects and some outside the box edits like this frame of Adam walking forward, and this blending of comic book scans and this image of rocks. There's even this clip of Mike Hurdle, one of Rooster Teeth's broadcasting engineers, during the part where they say different hikes for different mics. Although I'm not sure if that's an actual catchphrase, but who cares really. But on the other hand, the story stuff wasn't nearly as interesting. It has a solid start, but then kinda meanders around the end. I will say that the science stuff brought up in this analysis is still just as interesting as in Hank's, especially with where they have Boomstick equating science to pizza, bringing the whole running gag together. I do wish it was more subtle, but I'll live. Though I'm not a fan of how abruptly the rundown ends, though. Like,
who knew this tiny titan with massive brains would have just as much brawn to back it up?
how did this happen? Whatever, enough about that. We got a fight to look forward to. Musical sync with a Newton's cradle. I see you. And I just want to point out that Hank Pym is voiced by the same guy who voiced King Arthur from Sonic and the Black Knight, the best Sonic game to be an apologist to, and still has the best soundtrack in the entire fucking Sonic franchise. But to get the obvious issue out of the way, I don't quite care for the start of the fight. I was hard expecting the setup to be based around a scientific disagreement, with the fight being contextualized by how they're trying to prove their own personal hypothesis. But nope, it's just Ray sneaking around, barging into his office, and pissing off Hank because it's Hank Pym. That, and while I do like how different the shrinking effects are, with Ray's being inspired from how it looks in the Justice League cartoon, and Hank's consisting of after images. But other than that, this kick looks a little jank, and the falling pendulum was a little slow, and Hank's scream was really dumb. But otherwise, yeah, I don't really have a lot of issues with this fight. I did enjoy the Newton's cradle gag. I appreciated the efforts in making it funny by cutting off the music and cutting to a wide shot, making this whole bombastic situation just and the dialogue is really, really interesting. It does that thing that I really liked about Lex vs. Doom, where this felt more like a battle of wits rather than just a battle to the death. With Hank trying to argue that he can make something out of nothing, and Ray trying to argue, well, in his words,
everything we needed already existed. You just needed to be smart enough to put the pieces together.
Though I will say that the peak masterpiece casually takes a dub over this because it felt prevalent throughout the entire fight, whereas in Hank vs. Ray, it doesn't quite feel that way. I still like what's there, especially with its resolution. I just kinda wanted to see more of it. But don't worry, it's compliments from here on out. Mostly, but we'll get there. I really like the part with the ants. Apparently this whole tangent that Hank goes into is kind of incorrect, but then again, Ray's not necessarily agreeing with it. He's just saying, that makes sense. Meaning that even if it's untrue, it's not completely unreasonable. And then those 2.5 million ants under Ray's feet start attacking him, and Ray pulls out his sword. Y'all know that I really do love me some army fights, and I don't think it's that much different here, even if I do wish it was a bit longer. But the joke of Ray just casually growing in size and stomping on them kind of makes up for it. And then Hank uses that time to use his Pym particles to take the fight to quantum space. Ooh, this was precisely what I wanted to see from quantum space, and I couldn't be happier. This looks really, really nice. And then Hank starts another elaborate plan to hack into Rey's belt, which Rey seemingly catches onto. At first I thought it was odd how he never noticed the other ants that were also on his belt, but then again, ants do have pretty light steps, especially in comparison to humans. Sure, he didn't come across as the most intelligent, but that only comes into play later on. Cause this is the part where they start to have a gunfight, which is alright. I do like how Rey decides to leap onto Hank's gun and break it by analyzing the electron wave functions in them, following it up with that velocity of light feat from the analysis. I also thought it was weird how he goes after the gun instead of Hank's suit, but if this fight was supposed to be a battle of wits, I feel like this could be Rey trying to exploit the flaws in Hanks' unique tech, or at least trying to see how easy it was to figure it out. Also, this is one of those special weapons Hank has that is able to convert his entire biomass into the gunshots, so I reckon Rey would still consider this to be a decent threat regardless. Given how smart he's supposed to be, I can buy him figuring this out fairly quickly. And then the fight goes to the microverse. And yeah, this is clearly MCU coded, but I mean, how else are you gonna know that this is the microverse? And how else are you supposed to know that this is overspace? And then we get something of a mock kaiju fight, and it's really cool since the context is that they're trying to leave the microverse, but Rey can't do that so easily because of his belt's limitations. Although yes, I have heard people tell me that this is kind of out of character for Rey. If he knew that these were his limits, why would he just ignore them? I don't think that Rey's inferior intelligence was that prevalent to me, but I can still relate to some of the issues it has. But then Hank's ants destroy Rey's belt as he's weakened, and then Hank gives a great monologue about how his creations are so far out of his league, which was meant as payoff for their earlier exchanges. You know what? Even if I think Lex vs. Doom does this whole battle of wits things much better than Hank vs. Rey, I think this one has a far better payoff, which ironically kind of makes it feel better to me. Especially when it leads into this amazing hand-drawn kill. Like, the fact that it was fully hand-drawn, and the fact that you can see the ants popping out of him, causing blood everywhere, and dealing so much damage to him that it apparently shuts off his brain. This is hands down the bloodiest death of the season, and I couldn't be happier. Even if I do like Rey, and I was also betting on him to win this. Then again, the G1 blog gaslit me with dark side scaling, so I guess I shouldn't have believed them. But either way, I would have taken their verdict over the conclusions, because this is basically just LOL, overspace transcends infinite universes, and LOL, ants in the pants! I mean, to be fair, it's not wrong by the episode's logic, it's just that if this was supposed to be an equalized stats argument, despite the corner boxes giving them stats, I do wish that they went in depth with who had the better scientific process, especially with how big of a moment they gassed it up to be. I will give the conclusion credit though. They do point out how Rey being able to fight with his entire mass at all times, moments like Rey flipping Hank as he's a much bigger size than he is, and even with how Rey's physical attacks feel more impactful at all times, be it through the sound design, animation, follow through, impact, timing, etc. And then Wiz drops the Ant-Man crawls up his ass meme and Boomstick to grace his scientific intellect over it. So we did get that Lex vs. Doom dialogue battle. It was just with Wiz and Boomstick the whole time. Though it would have worked if Boomstick's pun didn't suck anal beats in the context of this, really. Although they did say in the commentary that they unironically did consider this being the kill, but they axed the idea fairly early on and decided that it should be ants instead. I mean, I guess that's fair enough. It is in line with their conclusions argument. Although another thing I really like about this fight, the track. Definitely one of the most underrated tracks of the season and even the show in my opinion. Where else are you gonna get a death battle track that's in 7/8 time? Yes, that is most likely because it's referencing the MCU Ant-Man theme. It's still a complete rarity, and I'm still very happy to see it. I really dig the blending of 60s rock and orchestra, and I especially love the part where it randomly jump scares you with the Earth's Mightiest Heroes theme. And the way that it works with the fights is also really good. Though I reckon one probably thinks that I really like this track entirely because of its music composition wankery, and you'd be right. So yeah, I'd say that this episode is perfectly balanced fun. They don't use all of their powers, but they use some of them. The setup has some issues, but it had a couple of cute gags here and there. The dialogue isn't as prevalent as it should have been, but it has an amazing payoff. I'd give it a very solid 83 out of 100. Also, shoutouts to people named Raymond, unironically some of the most intelligent people in existence for real. And I'd argue that they're especially smarter than purple-haired Australian. I'll be be honest with you guys, I was kind of expecting this to be this season premiere, just because it was revealed very early on at MagFest 2023, and Liam Swan hyped it up as something amazing, literally saying it was his new favorite episode of the entire show. And then
I'm gonna stuff so many Dark Souls memes into this episode, you won't even believe it.
Yep, this was a passion project of his. It's also really funny how this episode was initially advertised as Dark Souls vs. Skyrim, but then it quickly changed its name to Skyrim vs. Dark Souls the day before the episode aired to optimize SEO. Also, shoutouts to the place I was living in at the time, getting a citywide internet outage 10 minutes before this episode premiered. And shoutouts to the IT people choosing not to acknowledge the problem until 5 hours after it happened, causing it to be unresolved until around midnight, which caused me to sleep in longer than necessary because I had to drive to the airport at 5 in the morning the following sunrise because I had to make my trip to Japan. I wish I was making this up. Full disclosure, I did not have the best attitude when watching this episode for the first time, but I gave it another rewatch and my opinion on it has definitely changed from my first viewing. Let's get into that. Chosen Undead's rundown was not my favorite, at least for the first half. I really wanted to get invested in the lore, but I keep getting bombarded with unfitting Soul series memes that, while don't break my immersion, still felt shoehorned. I will acknowledge that it has the good idea of Wiz being used to explain as much of the lore as he can, catering to the fans who care about that stuff, and Boomstick referencing those memes for the fans who just wanted to hear them. I think this works in moments like referring to the Moonlight Greatsword as a universe-hopping anomaly. Not only is this an endearing reference to how it's in so many different FromSoft games, but it's also placed in an area where they're talking about their abilities and weapons. But then Boomstick referencing the Get Good and Giantest of Dads when they're talking about the world's lore and facts of the undead respectively, it just doesn't feel as cute as they think it is. Remember in both of his JoJo episodes where the memes felt naturally weaved in? Okay, not all of them, but in Dio's analysis, assuredly they did. Or how he still gave plenty of time to talking about interesting story beats of JoJo without having the memes ruin it. Basically, it was kind of doing the opposite in this analysis. Until Jocelyn shows up, where, yeah, it definitely gets better. She explains the much deeper lore that I really wanted to hear in the first half, and her deliveries are very charming. It was at this point where I was invested, except for the part where Wiz says, "That's a bummer," and "the biggest bummer of them all." And Boomstick saying that the whole undead twist was a conspiracy and putting on a really facetious tone for no reason. No, stop it. But to be fair, it is mostly compensated with the ending note Jocelyn gives about how we're bonded by life struggles, as well as how the good ending never existed. And I do think their coverage of the first flame makes it work well enough. I just wish that the first half had more emphasis on this ending note, where it felt like it was being properly foreshadowed. But I'd still say this was a good analysis. Unlike Dragonborn's analysis. I fucking said it. I said it. There. I don't like how it was more comedy focused. Elder Scrolls fans love their memes. I understand. They have a lot of iconic memes. But the problem for me is that I just didn't find any of the jokes funny. Except for the spaghetti code reference. The sound effects combined with the stock scream and red overlay actually got me to chuckle a bit. But there were just so many editing gags that I just got annoyed by at times. I got no beef with Parker's editing style. I think it's good, and I especially like the fire transitions from Chosen Undead's rundown. But in Dragonborn's, I feel like Parker was over-reliant on the music cutoffs for comedic effect. I usually enjoy this editing technique. It's something that even I use in my videos, but Parker uses it about 5 times in this rundown alone, 3 of them being around the same minute, and one of them was used in a line that wasn't even a joke. Though I get that this was another analysis that's more so based around the massive arsenal rather than the story. And to its credit, the arsenal was covered fairly well, going over the various weapons, shouts, artifacts, etc., and even going over the workings of some of them. It's pretty fascinating stuff. And I also liked the cutaway gag in a way, where Boomstick casually forgot that Wiz sold his soul to pay off his student loans, as you do, but I did not laugh at the cheese calc. I'm sorry, I just couldn't bring myself to. But then we get to the ending. It builds up how the Dragonborn became this legendary warrior that overcame unfathomably powerful foes, and Boomstick's last line had a genuinely badass delivery. You were so close. And that's another issue right there. Given how heavy of a focus the comedy gets in this rundown, they kind of forget to hype up how powerful all these beings are. Barring Alduin, of course, but all these other beasts and legends, what's so powerful about them? I kind of wanted to know that. Or at least it would have made the ending note far stronger, and would have also overshadowed Boomstick's botched cover of the Skyrim theme. But don't worry, we got a fight to look forward to, and I will say, I adore the setup. I saw a lot of people getting confused about what the story was supposed to be, and I can see why. It is just one big Dark Souls reference, where Chosen Undead is fighting for Kingseeker Frompt, and the Dovahkiin is fighting for Darkstalker Koth. And the Dovahkiin has worked with dark figures before, so this setup makes perfect sense. And it also has a really strong epilogue, but we'll get there later. This was a phenomenal setup that fully had me immersed for this epic battle between legends, especially with this amazing shot of Dovahkiin's head reflecting off of the Chosen Undead's helmet. And then they start fighting one another and... Oh, don't worry, that wasn't my immersion. Though I will say, the models have very little to do with my criticisms. Or at least, I'm pretty lenient with them. These are very old models being animated in an engine that I don't think they were made with in mind. And believe it or not, it's because of that that I'm also able to ignore the multiple shots where their arms are being distorted in very weird ways. Besides, in the rare instances where they need to show strong emotion, they actually do a good job of it in some areas. Rather, I'm gonna be criticizing basically everything else. From here on out, there will be no sugarcoating of any caliber. There is way too much jank in this animation, especially at the start. And no, I don't agree that this is supposed to be a nod to how janky their movements are. Intentional jank for the sake of a joke is meant to be super obvious to the viewer, and this episode has a very clear distinction of that. With this dodging bit, the jank actually works for me because it starts off looking really well animated, but then we get to this funny top-down view, and... But this start, man, the sword slashes and shield bashes have them leading with their arms instead of their core weight. And sometimes they do that thing where they have their elbows locked at full extension, or that other thing where they're putting the wrong foot forward. Also, Dovahkiin's posture is just pitiful here. Bro, why are you sticking out your neck so far? And what's up with your hunchback problem? You look like a death battle hater. And this shield parry especially looks really bad because Chosen Undead refuses to twist its core body in the slightest, and Dovahkiin's head is getting knocked in the wrong direction. Plus, if you look close enough, you might see that Chosen Undead's shield isn't even flinching against Dovahkiin's attacks. It looks less like they're carrying heavy weapons and more like they're holding lightweight weapons, but have no idea how to wield them properly. I'm just gonna say it, Conrad versus John had a better start to the fight than this. No, I'd actually go further than that. Batgirl versus Spider-Gwen had a better start to the fight than this. Like, as jank as it was, at least it was fast-paced and didn't overstay its welcome for 1,000 years. This one drags on, and I just don't think it's well animated. And then we get to this hammer swing, which, okay, sure, the posing is much better, but it still has awful timing in the actual swing. Instead of feeling like he's putting his all into swinging a giant mallet, it feels more like he's slowly rotating his body while he happens to be holding it. And then it expects me to believe that this would have a massive impact. That's not all the jank in this animation, but I will start to give some praises here because it does have a lot of good in it. Specifically when they focus on their massive arsenals. And I especially like the dynamic on how every time Chosen Undead dies, he comes back with a new strategy, or at least a new weapon. Then they reference the arrow to the knee meme with Undead's funny death scream, which is the one they play in the analysis with Boomsix saying how it seems like... Yes! And it's so natural too! And then we get to this onslaught from Chosen Undead, and it's a lot better than the back and forth from earlier. I mean, sure, it does get stiff at the end, but it does make sense in context of the animation at least. But otherwise, the posing is much better. It actually feels like he's attacking with his core weight, and the shield bashes look much more powerful. And then Dovahkiin summons his dragon friend, who takes out the undead, but then he later responds by one-shotting it with the Go's Great Bow, which works as a perfect callback to the analysis. And then you have Dovahkiin summoning a storm, and Undead's response to it by catching 2 of the lightning bolts and slamming them into the ground, causing this breathtaking shot of the fire lighting up a fog cloud, which I'd like to think is symbolic of Undead's general persistence despite having died numerous times. This actually looks live action. That's impressive. And then we get to the Moonlight Greatsword fight, and I am kind of mixed on it. I do think it has a neat idea with it being so powerful that it's able to deflect the Dawnbringer strikes by staying perfectly still, but then again, it does have some of that jank that I mentioned earlier, albeit not as bad. Dovahkiin's core movement is at least better here, except for this one swing that somehow pushes Undead back despite the animation not even having a swing, like really? But once Undead actually swings the Greatsword, the animations are a lot better here. The clever animations, the sound effects, I can practically feel him shooting those moonbeams. Oh, but then the Valve silence moment, the Valve silence moment, it's so good! Silencing everything, even the music, leading into the part where Undead gets impaled and forces himself forward to get a chokehold and drop a banger line, ooh! This is easily the best part of the episode, no contest. And apparently the prepare to die is referencing to a specific edition of Dark Souls? Wow. Okay. And then Dovahkiin breaks out and impales the undead again through the neck. And we get to the ending, which, okay, yeah, I hate this ending. This is deadass a bottom 5 ending in the entire show, and easily the weakest death of the season by far. Undead linking the first flame is a nice moment, but then the fire engulfs Dovahkiin and he doesn't even look concerned. And the actual attack doesn't seem like it dispelled the flame very well. Not to mention they used the exact same voice clip as the one in the beginning. Look, I know that the unrelenting force isn't always massively powerful, but there's a huge difference between the force being intentionally weaker and outright using the exact same level of force with inconsistent strength. Let me show you what I mean. It's the same voice clip. Hell, its impact is even weaker than the lightning crash from earlier. Gray versus Esdeath had a better death than this, because at least Gray's attack got Esdeath a little bit concerned, and at least you could see Gray getting hit. But then there is the epilogue, which I really do like. This is the part where a lot of people got confused, but don't worry, I can tell you what's going on. What this is supposed to mean is that Dovahkiin was being manipulated by Darkstalker Koth the whole time to disperse the first flame and let darkness flood the world. It's meant to be a bittersweet ending. The kill might suck, but at the end of the day, the hopeless ending is still really good, and ties naturally into the Elder Scrolls series and especially Dark Souls. And as for the conclusion, it's technically good, but the music is so loud that I can barely hear the host talking. I may have ragged on Brandon and Therwolf for not releasing the instrumental versions of their track, but I've recently been informed that they kind of can't do that, because Rooster Teeth just actively isn't letting them for some reason. But that said, there's just no excuse to have not used the instrumental version here, because the vocals are just so overbearing that it genuinely hurts my head. I'm aware this is a me thing, and I'm not docking points for this, but I'd be lying if I said I couldn't ignore this. But as for the conclusion itself, yeah, it's really good. I especially like the part where they admit that untraditional deaths count for the show. Oh, and speaking of the track itself, yeah, Fireborn is phenomenal. Consisting of Death Battle fans in a choir that Brandon orchestrated, apparently this was an open call audition that he posted on Twitter. I was off Twitter for Lent during the time, but man, I really wish I was able to make it, as I would have loved to have been a part of this. I did a lot of singing work in college, taking some contemporary voice lessons, and joining in the gospel choir, even getting a solo in my final semester. So yeah, Brandon, Therwolf, if you're watching this and you need a vocalist for any of your commission tracks, then hit me up. I have been really critical about this, and I'm not denying that this was a passion project, which is the whole reason why this episode is not one I would call overrated. Above all else, people are rightfully praising it as a passion project. While it didn't work for me, I still can't deny that it was there. Meanwhile, with episodes that I do think are overrated, they'd have to be praised for reasons that I think several other episodes were able to do just as well, if not better. Chosen Undead vs. Dovahkiin is just an episode that's not for me, and that's okay. Not every episode needs to be for me. I mean, I already got 2 episodes in this season that felt like they were made for me, and 1 episode that literally had me in it. So I think I can be okay with 1 episode not being one-to-one with my preferences. At the end of the day, this video is about my personal preferences, so sadly I have to give this episode a 62 out of 100. But don't get me wrong, I can still see why people love this episode so much. And I can totally understand people who are more familiar with these series than I am, considering this among their favorites of the season, if not the show. And other people just think it's a fun time. Although Wiz did say "that's right, boomstick" in the advertisement, so maybe my opinion is objectively incorrect or something. POV, you mentioned to people that Killua vs. Misaka is considered a lowlight of the season. Yeah, okay, so, I got several comments that told me this episode was underrated and that so many people were sleeping on it. And I will say this episode came out at the perfect time for me. I was just getting into Hunter x Hunter during the time, and the moment this episode got announced was the moment I was ready to start the Zoldyck family arc. And so I was able to watch it during the waiting period, at least during the time where I wasn't in Japan. So I was super excited to see Killua. And it made the waiting period even more obnoxious when people randomly felt like having a fetish for saying that Killua gets stomped. First, I'd like to mention something that isn't totally relevant to the episode, but it's something I really wanted to bring up last time, but couldn't because NDA. But I guess that doesn't matter because it was just brought up in the last Fireside chat, so Death Battle members are probably already aware of this, but just for those who aren't, this episode technically ties all the way back to Season 9, which is where they first got the idea to make it a full episode. Remember Deku versus Asta? Well, that one was originally gonna be Deku versus Tanjiro, but then Herschel told everyone that the matchup is total shithouse and they should actually do a good matchup for Tanjiro instead. And the reason why they went with Asta instead of Gon was because they didn't want to have to do 2 Hunter x Hunter episodes in such close proximity with one another. And yet somehow they saw no issue with... Like with Hank's analysis, Killua's analysis has such a natural weaving of story and verses. Albeit there's more emphasis on the latter, but it makes sense since Hunter x Hunter is a new series, and the powers, like Nen, are actually super complex. You'd think that the way Boomstick frames it would mean that, oh, Nen is not actually that complex or something, but like, no. The anime alone spent multiple episodes in a row covering the basics of Nen. So yeah, of course you'd want to spend a lot of time covering the power sets of Hunter x Hunter and how it's catered to each specific character. And even then, I think they're summarized pretty well. Hell, there's even this black box that points out how bungee gum contains the properties of both rubber and gum. This is objectively peak, and you are wrong if you disagree with me. In general, I just really like how Wiz is getting passionate about Nen. This was something I alluded to earlier on, but this season just really lets Wiz cut loose with being a passionate scientist who loves the work he does. Hank vs. Ray had this aspect about Wiz as well, but I think it's done better here because it's far more apparent, where at times even Boomstick feels the need to calm him down. They don't spoil too much of Killua's story, but they do go over the early beats of his arc while still feeling complete. And with the editing, while it wasn't as creative or compelling as Hank's, it was still good. But there is one aspect that we need to normalize praising this episode for way more often. The fact that they don't make any "LOL, Hunter x Hunter will never end" jokes, or any nonsense like, "we may never know where his story will end." Even in Sanji vs. Rock Lee, they really couldn't help themselves by going, "LOL, One Piece is a very long story." Ooh. But here, they put in the extra effort to make it feel like Killua's story got a proper resolution. And even though it doesn't, you'd have a hard time believing otherwise. It's just so well handled, and it's such a great note to end off on. And the way that they utilize the photos of his family and his friends, pitch it into that glove, you are perfect! And as for Misaka's rundown, I mean, it's alright. It displays well-detailed feats and abilities, it nuances her character really well, and it fleshes out the world solidly enough. The only reason it didn't click with me as much as it did with other people is because... okay, I hate to admit this, but it's because I'm not familiar with Toaru. Now, I know that's a meme, and I've been in the minority for disagreeing with this notion heavily. I feel like Death Battle does a great job of getting me interested in series I'm not familiar with, especially since here, Toaru fans have been very happy with how Misaka's rundown was handled, barring a few, actually, moments that will probably be brought up in the comments that I won't be reading, although personally, I am not fond of them showing a bunch of naked Misaka clones on screen. But otherwise, I can't imagine it being too offensive. So instead, I'll just link this review by Aeon of Horus in the description. I know he only analyzes the fight, but Toaru fans are virtually non-existent in the Death Battle community, so I want to try and give their takes as much publicity as I can. I mean, finish my video first, obviously, but for now, I'll give my take on the fight. I have heard that Misaka's voice is nothing like her official VA, and after taking a few listens to her official voice, yeah, I can see it. There's a lot less confidence in her tone, and it doesn't come across as the whole "I'm smarter than you" rhetoric that she's known for having. It's not a bad performance, it's just not really accurate to the character. Though as for Killua's voice, I would like to point out that it's the exact same voice actor as the current voice of Princess Daisy. Yes, I'm serious. Live with this knowledge. Though since I am familiar with Killua, I can say that his characterization was very well done. This frog coin has a lot of sentimental value to Misaka, and while Killua didn't know that immediately, he still got to a point where he felt the need to be a sissy little troll over this, and yeah, this is something Killua would do. And since he doesn't understand the sentimental value of the coin, he feels even more justified to do this. And then they start fighting one another, and yeah, I love this shot of Killua just being completely unimpressed by this Mach 3 railgun shot, and then giving a call back to his butler, Goto. Then he starts using Rhythm Echo, and okay, it isn't nearly as good as it is in the show. I would have liked there to have been a purple overlay, a more menacing walk cycle with bigger steps, and maybe proper motion blur on each of the illusions, but I mean, it's not bad or anything. And I also like Misaka using a clever sound tactic to reveal the clone, which is supposed to be a reference to her fight against this character named Brunhild. And from the clips I've looked into, it's actually utilized better than in the actual fight against Brunhild, so good job, guys, good job. And this is a key aspect of the fight. It has a smart blend of strategy and wit, while still maintaining the dynamic of Killua being superior at close range, and Misaka being better at keeping her distance. That's especially prominent with this exchange right here.
He's good at hand-to-hand. Better keep my distance.
She has stronger lightning. Gotta get in close.
No problem.
On top of that, this is meant to be a really big character moment for Killua. You see here, a big part of his character arc in Hunter x Hunter was that he was brainwashed into running away from stronger opponents. But he eventually grew past that and focused his victories on finding other ways to win. And this is supposed to be reflective of that while also acknowledging that Misaka has abilities more powerful than his. Then we get this nifty little chase scene with Killua on the skateboard, which he doesn't use all too often. At least not after having learned Nen, let alone with his yo-yo. This just felt like a really creative way to have Killua matching Misaka's levitation and telekinesis while also being a nod to the fight against Sub. And Misaka dodging the yo-yo is also a reference to another one of her fights where she's able to react to an attack but doesn't have time to process how she would react to it. Oh, and that building she crashes into? This is supposed to be Heaven's Arena. I already really enjoyed the City at Night aesthetic because that is my aesthetic, but I really like how this implies this is supposed to be a location from Hunter x Hunter. And from what I've seen of Magical Index, some of the bigger fight moments, at least for Misaka specifically, do take place at night. This means that the setting makes a lot more sense to me. And while Misaka starts to have the advantage at long range, Killua eventually finds his way in by jumping off of his skateboard and launching himself towards Misaka as opposed to just simply running towards her. And then we get to the Godspeed versus Iron Sand Sword Rampage dress scuffle, and okay, I'll admit, I don't like the way this looks. It looks really, really stiff. But still, it's supposed to demonstrate Killua's advantage at close-range combat. But then we get to the best part of the animation, the Sand Kaiju. This is entirely hand-drawn, but it actually matches perfectly with the pixel art. And then we get these two breathtaking shots of Killua back-to-back, where he immediately notices the flaws in Kaiju structure and disrupts its electromagnetic energy. Although I have heard that Misaka has this mech form thing that could work for this moment, if not better, and if the Kaiju is destroyed in this way, Misaka can just summon it again almost instantly. But from what I've looked into, the idea was that the Kaiju was something that Killua could actually take down with the stats that Death Battle gave him, on top of Misaka using it as a decoy, which is revealed later on. Whereas this mech thing isn't something that Killua could take care of nearly as easily, even if it would make sense for a climax. And then the ending has this fake out, and the blood not being red was supposed to be the indicator that the Misaka was a decoy, which leads into the kill where Misaka uses her tactics and intelligence to find that perfect angle to shoot Killua out of the sky. Oh, and by the way, all of these beats, all of these references, these Easter eggs, these character moments, etc., this is not my headcanon. These were all intentional according to the writers and researchers. They knew going in that this fight wasn't gonna be one of the more popular matchups or even one of the more well-known fights. So they tried their hardest to make the characters look as cool as possible. Wow, it's almost like this is something Death Battle does every day. To be fair, Misaka's characterization may vary depending on your investment in Toaru, but speaking as an outsider, I still found her an intelligent badass more often than not. Like when she uses Killua's yo-yo against him, the sound tactic, taking advantage of her superior transportation in the chase sequence to get ahead, conjuring the storm from her rundown, and basically the entire ending. Although I have also seen people having a problem with Misaka laughing at her killing a kid, but to me at least, it was more so delivered that she was laughing at her frog coin back into her hand out of nowhere, as well as just generally being happy to see it again. And as for the conclusion, yeah, it's really good. Straight up one of the best of the season. Not only do they cover the stat gaps, but also go into the idea of them being able to win via hacks, since using abilities to overcome foes that are stronger than you is a huge part of both series. Which, for some reason, I have heard people say, oh, the episode convinces you that this fight is close, even though, no, that's not even 0.5% close to what they're saying. Even if that was the case, yo, Nemi boy, what was the power gap between these two? At least the one you found?
This puts actual Who's output at 18.5 times more powerful than Killua.
Huh, that's interesting. It's almost like, this fight was never a stomp in the first place. Why were you so caught up in this fight vaguely being a stomp when no, it wasn't? And even then, the biggest possible gap is only a 41 times power difference. Is this what you call a massive stomp? I remember the previous episode doing the exact same thing despite the power gap being beyond infinite power versus very obviously not infinite power in any way, shape, or form, yet I didn't see anyone complaining about that conclusion. But sure, I'll pretend that this is somehow not the stupidest double standard in the history of stupid double standards. Did you guys just want this episode to fail or something? Oh wait, they actually kinda did. Yeah, people had a fetish for telling people that this episode was a flop, despite the fact that, no. I can understand Death Battle haters doing this, but like, these came from fans of the show celebrating this episode being a flop. Death Battle community, why are you the way that you are? Don't get me wrong, a lot of y'all are great, far more than you aren't, but at the same time, I hate so much about the things that you choose to be. Look, if you're gonna dislike this episode, fine, but at least criticize it for its actual problems. Like this one that I've admittedly been neglecting, but is actually a very major issue. I'm not the biggest fan of this episode's sprite rigging. I do like the sprites. Misaka's from that one fighting game Dengeki thing, I'm too stupid on the title, and Killua's sprites were custom made by Origin the PogChamp, and they look really good, aside from the awkward Godspeed hair. That looks like somebody hid their light underneath a bushel. And also the posing is just not very good most of the time. And while I did enjoy the analyses, I did feel like I needed to be more familiar with Toaru to get the full experience from it. Oh yeah, and the Killua puns were kind of lame, especially since they creeped their way into Misaka's rundown and even the conclusion for some reason. But regardless, I still really like this episode and think more people need to wake up on it. 79 out of 100. Regardless of how unimpressive the score might be in the grand scheme of things, please give this episode another watch, especially if you want to see Death Battle using other less popular characters and franchises. How about we start getting some W's for the Raptor in the chat? Stitch vs. Rocket wasn't a matchup that I immediately got. It definitely took me a while, but
Whoa! Oh, yo! Hell yeah!
it grew on me. It also got me to rewatch Lilo and Stitch during the waiting period, and how do you make me cry 3 times while still being super funny? Seriously, this low-key might actually be among my favorite Disney movies of all time now. Wow. And of course, Rocket Raccoon is Rocket Raccoon. Love the guy since Marvel, baby. I love the MCU Guardian films. So yeah, this episode has potential for being a lot of fun, and Stitch's analysis is one of them. Like, it does rush through his story, kind of, but this is meant to be a fun video to watch in the summer. Plus, it helps contextualize the strength increase of his power cell, which is powered by his love for his Ohana. It's not a moment they capitalize on, but it didn't have to be. It was still established very well with making Stitch's family feel important, and then showing how his love for his family continued to make him strong. It's neat, and it was also cool seeing Wiz express admiration for Jumba, admiring him for his scientific brilliance and thinking that he was done dirty. Oh, and their reactions to Stitch's slur?
He did not!
I think I'm gonna be sick. Oh, so naughty.
Absolutely perfect. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way, even though the line was recycled in the fight. And then we get to the cutaway gag where they did something even more unthinkable. They did a boomstick ex-wife joke and made me laugh at it unironically. Like, wow. That's impressive. Maybe it's because, unlike every other Boomstick ex-wife joke, they actually did more with the joke. They got Boomstick to feel offended by Wiz comparing her to all of these experiments with gross titles, implying that he still has standards to how his ex-wife should be insulted. Even Dummy expresses disappointment in Wiz, and then Wiz tries to alleviate the situation. Although it does that thing where Boomstick seems like he's away, but then it's like, never mind, I'm fine. Oh, was that Grenda? What? The rest of the analysis was really fun. Learning about Stitch's various powers, hearing all of these Lilo and Stitch characters name dropped, seeing clips from the animated series that I remember watching as a kid, it's all good stuff. Although Parker still does that cut off the music for the sake of comedy edit, it's at least more spaced out in comparison to Dragonborn's analysis. And it does also have this weird genre of edit that, to be fair, I use in my videos as well, but you know how I get around this? It's that easy. But to be fair, it still has some great edits of the movie and show clips, as well as this really nifty paper cut edit of Stitch on his ship. And you know what other edits I really liked? Some of the edits in Rocket's analysis. In fact, I think it's kind of underrated. Okay, let me explain. Speaking as someone who does video editing for a living, and no, I'm not talking about this YouTube channel, you don't need to have the fanciest edits to make an engaging video. The most important thing you need to get down is to just pick up the pace. It doesn't have the classic comic book editing, often showing full comic book panels. Something I like about how Rocket's analysis was handled in terms of editing was how Parker shows parts of the comic panels and uses pans and slide transitions to show more of them, as if you're reading the comic itself. It might not be the most impressive edit in the world, but it still does a good job at maintaining the viewer's attention, especially since the edits are still fast-paced enough to not make it feel like it's dragging on. His story was definitely highlighted more than it was in Stitch's analysis, for instance. Beginning it with how he found a group of assholes like himself and ending it with how they softened in his edge. Even if he still tends to go in guns blazing, that's just Rocket's character. While there's not as much Guardians material, which does kind of suck given that this is the first Guardians of the Galaxy character Death Battle has ever used, I still think there are some interesting tidbits here and there, like his backstory and the time when he was remade. And I also really like the cutaway where Boomstick gets to flex his knowledge on raccoons, all while wearing a funny coonskin cap, which would normally be Rocket chewing on his skull. And I also like to think that it was payoff to Boomstick saying that he studied up on some very specific research from earlier in the analysis, but I could be wrong and he was actually referring to researching the Beatles song, but either way, he still looks good in that hat. And he also expresses how he thinks raccoons look cute. Again, Boomstick saying cute things look cute. I want more of this, please. And I also like Wiz being adamant about Rocket not being a raccoon, but then he decides to not antagonize Boomstick for consistently calling him a raccoon due to feeling fairly impressed with Boomstick's raccoon knowledge, implying that he sees enough value in him to overlook whatever gripes he had. And then we get into the fight, and as expected, it's a lot of fun. It starts with Stitch pissing off Rocket for destroying his ship, who's all like, "Yeah, bitch, what of it?" And the voice actors do a great job at enhancing the comedy of the episode, especially with Jeff Shine's Rocket. Though I'd like to point out that Jeff also voiced Chris Redfield in Resident Evil Village and Captain America in Squeenix's Avengers game. This casting is really funny in hindsight. Oh, and Delton Engel Sorrell's Stitch is also good, much better than my impression if you ask me, capturing the character's cackles and accent perfectly. And then they start shooting at each other, and it's a pretty neat gunfight. Rocket being the first to shoot makes a lot of sense, because that's in line with how Death Battle interprets Rocket's character. And then he shoots Stitch's tiki necklace, which has sentimental value to him, and while it looks like Stitch is dodging his lasers by just he's at least vaguely moving away, so it's still weird, but less weird than it could have been. But it's made up for by Stitch throwing the vague insult about Rocket's mother. Pay attention to Rocket's response here.
What did you say about my mother?
The analysis forgets to bring this up, but Rocket has been able to translate tons of alien languages all on his own. But it still begs the question, how can he understand Tantalog, Stitch's language? Well, that's always been the joke with the language. Even when people do know it, it's never explained what the words actually mean. So the outlandish reactions carry the comedy, and Rocket's reactions are perfect in this context. Like in this part, he literally doesn't know what kind of insult Stitch just said, because the insult Stitch just threw at him translates to a vague insult about the other person's mother. And of course, there is the moment later on where Stitch says, "You know what," which was recycled from the analysis, but Rocket is so repulsed by it that he says that Stitch needs to die right now. That is perfect. But as for the rest of the action, it does that thing like in Scrooge vs. Shovel Knight and Korra vs. Storm, where Rocket does nearly all the damage until the kill, where Stitch just wins after getting a couple of hits. I'm actually okay with it here. Like for one of Rocket's advantages was his versatile arsenal, which leads into yet another contrast in fighting style, with Stitch being superior at hand-to-hand and close quarters, but Rocket having the deadlier weaponry. And it's also the reason why Rocket technically wins the gunfight at first. And for two, the conclusion outright says that Rocket is not physically impressive. His weapons do have moon, planet, and even universe-busting power, or at least they can compete with characters on that level. His physicality was city block level at best, and since Stitch's physical prowess was universal, he could theoretically end the fight in one hit, or at least a few. And three, Stitch doesn't just win due to being physically stronger, but due to being way faster and smarter, as seen with my favorite scene of the episode, where Rocket is forced to drop his gun during Stitch's onslaught, since it's cracking his barrier. But Rocket gets an advantage with his proton can-
My Thanos Buster!
But then Stitch starts sinking in the water and makes a rocket-powered jet from Rocket's discarded rocket launcher, dodging the proton cannon shot, and then getting the hit he needs by disabling Rocket's wrist device and blasting him into his satellite. And to think that the ending was supposed to be, this. What did y'all mean by this? But then Stitch murders the ice cream guy in cold blood and lathers the ice cream on his tongue. Although my sources are telling me that he's actually an Uchiha, so he kinda deserved it, but y'all ain't ready for that conversation. I think that the only part that isn't cohesive with the conclusion is this section where Stitch manages to survive Rocket's proton cannon. I'm aware that Stitch was thinking he could simply absorb Rocket's weapon, like he did earlier, but given that Rocket did say this was his
Thanos Buster!
I'd imagine that this was supposed to be Rocket's killing blow. But aside from that, the conclusion is still really solid. And I also like how they have Stitch show up to invade Wiz and Boomstick with a turkey, which is apparently a nod to the Deadpool cameo. Oh, and there's also the track Jailhouse Rocket. Super underrated, by the way. I love how it just goes all out with the Elvis style, not just being a clear homage to the Lilo and Stitch films, but it also fits naturally with the songs used in the MCU Guardians films, because they use a lot of retro rock, pop, blues, etc. songs. Although sadly, despite being being an honestly brilliant parody, it is not directly based on Jailhouse Rock. It's actually more so a combination of Blue Suede Shoes and Hound Dog, especially since those songs are in 12-bar blues as well, and looking at the lyrics, I see what you did there, Aaron. Overall, this fight's a lot of fun. It didn't need to be emotional or epic. It did what it needed to and gave me enough of what I wanted to see. I mean, sure, the sprite rigging is kind of weird in some places, particularly with this beatdown where Stitch is in a standing pose for most of the attacks. But then again, I still can't get enough of his facial expressions and how seamlessly they're animated, like, look at this. But ultimately, the biggest issue I have is that I just wanted to see more of it. It only clocks in at around 2.5 minutes, which is a shame, especially given how over budget every other episode feels. Still, I liked it a lot. 88 out of 100. Yippee-ki-yay, mother flarker. Okay, look, I might not have the most amount of experience with the Addams family, but I might relate to some of their music a little too much. Full disclosure, I was a bit disappointed to see this. I mean, I knew this was a super popular match and it was kind of inevitable, but my preferred for Darth Vader was Golbez from Final Fantasy IV. Not only is it one of the more interesting inspiration versus original matchups in my opinion, but it would also have given us something new. A Final Fantasy villain, let alone character, not from 7 one time, and meanwhile, you have Obito, who is just the 3rd Uchiha and the 4th Sharingan user that Death Battle is used. And from the reading I've done, he really doesn't have anything new or interesting to offer.
Summon the God Tree and prepare to launch the Infinite Tsukuyomi.
Okay, well I guess I stand corrected. And to be fair, if any episode had to cuck me of my preferred Vader matchup, I'm honestly glad that it was Obito. Because all of the other options were either on Death Battle 2 recently, do the bare minimum of Vader's connections, or just don't do it at all. And this was gonna be animated by Devil Artemis, and I already liked his previous Star Wars episodes, so I was looking forward to seeing him giving us another banger. And hey, we got a new writer debuting with this episode, Jangor, or Kian, if you will. Though rumor has it, this guy wants people to go easy on him in reviews.
Okay.
I didn't think Vader's analysis was all that interesting. Don't get me wrong, it's good, but the new stuff just didn't have as much substance as I would have liked. On the one hand, they cover the lightsaber fighting styles like in Yoda vs. Mickey, but they do elaborate on one that wasn't fully covered. And they also put more emphasis on his relationship with Palpatine and how much he hated him, ending his analysis with how Vader finally killed Palpatine, saved someone he loved, and brought balance to the Force. That's all fine and dandy with me. But on the other hand, I am kind of mixed on how Anakin's part of the story was handled. Like, I kind of wish they had more emphasis on his relationship with Padme. I know that his relationship with Obi-Wan needed more focus because it works better as a parallel to Obito and his relationship with Kakashi, but I would have liked Padme to have been name-dropped a single time, and for his grievances with the Jedi Council to be explained better, rather than being skimmed over and summarizing it as teenage angst. And even the cutaway gag is just Wiz and Boomstick making fun of his suit's weaknesses as if it wasn't containing a man who was already dead. Like, remember in the last episode where they didn't make fun of it and said it was just a simple downside and it was something that made his anger worse than it already was? Yeah, we don't really get any of that here. Aside from that, it does retread even more old ground. I am still mostly okay with it here because this is a returner. I can't really say the same about Obito's analysis, as it had me in the same mood. Although, like I alluded to earlier, the Infinite Tsukuyomi was a surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one. And I'll give the devil its dues, it's really well-paced stuff, with the abilities and forms being covered along with his story beats in a way that feels like they were never getting in the way, which further increases the impact of the reveal of that Infinite Tsukuyomi. And I do like the new story beats they cover, highlighting Madora's manipulation as a parallel to Vader's hatred for Palpatine, and ending it off with how he viewed Naruto and bettered himself, which already worked its payoff to Boomstick's fake-out from the beginning of the rundown. While these analyses weren't for me, I really do hope that Jangor gets to write more Death Battle episodes. He's got some untapped talent. But then we get into the fight with an epic rap battles of history jump scare. I have far more to say about it, good and bad. So let's just break this down atom by atom. Oh, and don't worry, I can actually handle the explosion. We start with Vader going up to Mr. Uchiha, seeing that his company has invaluable resources.
I will be taking it.
Okay, I might as well be upfront here saying that I would have preferred Evan Michael Lee to voice Vader in this, but I am aware that Jason Marnocha's voiced Vader in his DBX against Magneto, so in a way, yay, this is fan service, love to see it. And I also like the idea of the start of the fight, with Vader casually blocking and no-selling Obito's attacks. I have seen some people take issue with how dominant Vader is in this part of the fight, claiming that it was obvious that he was gonna lose because of it. Here's another angle to look at. Remember in Vader vs. Doom, where the moment the Doombot is destroyed, Vader just kind of gets washed completely? Even I kind of missed it when I revisited that episode. But yeah, once they travel back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu, Vader kind of does nothing substantial at all and gets treated like a jobber throughout the fight. I get that it was a part of the argument, but given that this is Darth Vader, having his imposing force not have much precedence at all is just not a good look. So I think it's understandable that they would want to have Vader being more prominently unstoppable in a way. I actually think the start of the fight has a great balance between them. Obito eventually evens the playing field as he powers up, and he's clearly more of a match for Vader as he uses his stronger abilities, like the Ten Tails and Truth-Seeking Orbs. But even in the beginning, Obito wasn't getting bodied that badly. Like there's this scuffle where Vader blocks Obito's attacks with the Force. It's interesting because this last one has Obito prepared for Vader's third block, immediately responding to it with a backhand, which actually forces Vader to struggle just a bit more than usual, emphasized by the throbbing Force sound effect and the extra frames on the posing. And I also like this shot where Vader is casually walking through Obito's kunai by lightly swinging his lightsaber, and when Vader does get hit, they feel impactful. Even if there's a lot of clipping in this fight, and I find that frankly disturbing. But eventually, Obito starts using his more out-there abilities to work around Vader's inherent dominance. Most of the attack poses are functional. There's really not that much jank here, and even Vader's seemingly stiff poses are mostly excusable given that it's meant to convey how Vader's supposed to be casually dominating this part of the fight. But those aren't the issues I have. The issues I have consist of moments like this, where there's just straight up no effect for Obito's phasing, or how this fire material is blatantly cut off in a few places, or this combo from Obito looks really slow and stiff, and there's also quite a bit of flickering. There's also some model clashing here and there, but I'm not blaming the episode for that. And the dark setting and lighting do their best to disguise the poor saturation in most areas. But still, Devil Artemis did a great job making Obito's jutsu abilities look fast, and moments like Vader using his precognition to prevent Obito's sneak attack was also really cool, even if it would have benefited from having a couple more animation frames, but what can you do? In fact, I'd argue that this fight is a perfect example of why Devil Artemis is one of the best animators to have ever worked on Death Battle. The storytelling and character acting. When Vader crushes Obito's mask, it immediately forms a face of Padme, and then Obito activates Kamui, and Vader uses the Force to escape its pull, with this shot getting across both his rage and his struggle to escape. All he's doing is just lifting his arm, yet the rippling distortion from Kamui makes it look like Vader is furious about trying to get out of this attack. And the fight gets into the very thing I was the most hopeful for. If I was never gonna get my heart-to-heart between Anakin and Theodore Harvey, the least you should do is have a final standoff with their masks broken, and this did that and more. Well, aside from this part where Vader's mask supposedly breaks because of a few random punches from Obito, I feel like Kamui tearing away at his helmet would have made more sense than this, but I reckon that's just a budget limitation or SFM thing. After that, they have this exchange.
You've lost your humanity as well.
On the path of the dark side, it is inevitable.
This, to me, says more about their characters than any conversation where they share sob stories about their traumatic pasts ever could. As Obito, at least from my understanding and how the analysis framed his story, can still see humanity in others. So the fact that a shot like this would tell Obito that Vader has no humanity left in him, and Vader delivering his line the way he did really tells me a lot about how their stories end. Even Vader casually recollecting his lightsaber creates some body language that says losing his humanity was just a part of the job or something. But then we get to the Ten Tails, where, fun fact, this was supposed to be hidden, a la Madara vs. Aizen, but then Devil Artemis was like, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing, and just rendered the whole fucking beast. Absolute Chaddington Wells. And then you get to this part with Vader being impressed yet unfazed by the Ten Tails and just catching the beast bomb in his hands and tanking the explosion head on. Also, there's the cohesion with him not being impressed at first, but then after he sees the Ten Tails, he literally says,
Impressive.
That's how you know he's taking this fight seriously. He rarely finds anything impressive. And then after that scene, we get this banger line that will be explained later. But for now, I will say that this is kind of where the fight peaks for me. It's still well animated stuff, don't get me wrong. It's just that, well,
I expected more.
Yeah, exactly. Obito using the truth-seeking orbs to destroy more parts of Vader's suit and destroying his mask with his staff, those go hard. But while Obito has more interesting strategies and attacks and abilities, Vader doesn't do any of it. The most he does is weaponize his destroyed TIE Fighter, which, okay, this is epic. But it's still less impressive than with how he handled the Ten Tails. Like, there's a lot more he can do with the Force, but this is the most he does in the climax, and I'm not the biggest fan of it, I'll be honest. But then he pulls in Obito with the Force, about to take the win.
Too late.
There it is, the infinite Tsukuyomi. This thing was being foreshadowed ever since that one exchange. The Padme illusion, the 10-tailed beast giving him time to set it up, the God Tree giving it space, and there's one more thing. One could argue that the opening exchange was implying that something big was gonna happen in the climax. What is this power that Vader was sensing? And like, remember that exchange I mentioned earlier? The intent was to have Vader and Obito do one of those he's just like me moments, and have their end goal be put them out of their misery, with Vader wanting to prove Obito's idealistic philosophy as hypocritical, and Obito wishing to show Vader that it's not impossible to experience happiness on his path of the dark side. In other words, the stuff about his peace in the next life, the happiness that he would eventually get to see in the infinite Tsukuyomi? 3 words there, buddy.
This is inevitable.
All of that being delivered perfectly by Nicholas Andrew Louis. And I gotta say, this is easily my favorite performance of his. It's for the same reasons why I enjoyed his Ben 10 voice so much, where he gets to flex his versatile vocal range. And it's no different here. Albeit I'd argue that there's a lot more polish in each of the voices he has, whether it's the Madara voice, the unmasked Obito voice, or his Jubito voice. But you're probably wondering what I have to say about the infinite Tsukuyomi scene itself. Overall, I think this is a wholesome moment that means Obito was able to let Anakin be happy again. Seeing his emotions so clearly expressed the moment he sees Padme again, it's still a good emotional moment. But I do have some weirdly specific issues with it. And that's with the shots that they go with. I didn't find the models to be as distracting as other people did. Padme's was mostly fine, like I didn't notice her unibrow right away, but I still found Anakin's model distracting at least. But if this was gonna be the case, I would have preferred starting off with a POV shot of Vader looking at his hands, seeing one of them has human skin again, and then he looks up to see Padme right in front of him. I mean, I guess it's not a breaking point, but it could have been better if it was like this to me. Not to mention, I do feel like name-dropping Padme would have made this moment a lot more powerful to me, because as I mentioned earlier, the analysis really doesn't do a great job of establishing their relationship, which means that it does kind of come out of nowhere. Don't mistake me for saying that this was abrupt, because it's not, and to the people who did criticize this scene for being abrupt, how? Like, how long did you want it to be? It was being foreshadowed throughout damn near the entire fight, so like, why is this criticism a thing? I don't know, whatever. Still, at least there's a kill, where he wishes Vader to find peace in the next life, only to destroy him with a soul-destroying sword, so there is no next life for him. Oh wait, is this the part where we talk about the result? Where I got a portion of people wanting me to dedicate a video about it just because of the controversial result? I mean, what do you want me to say? There were a lot of people who disagreed with the outcome. Oh no! Anyways, it's really not that surprising that they had Obito win. Star Wars stats are already very divisive from what I've looked into and heard from other people. Death Battle themselves have been pretty wishy-washy with Star Wars. Like when they finally brought back the series with Obi-Wan, they gave him planet level scaling and FTL speeds. But then Yoda vs. King Mickey came around, and despite Yoda being just as powerful, if not slightly more so than Obi-Wan, they didn't put him at planet level, and they kind of didn't give him FTL speeds. And also, Obi-Wan vs. Kakashi said that the Force was inherently limitless, but then in Yoda vs. King Mickey, they just randomly feel like saying, the Force isn't exactly limitless either. Though, to be fair, they were saying how overusing the Force has led to physical strain. Okay, fair enough, that could apply to Yoda specifically, but why are you saying this now when you didn't say this beforehand? But then come Darth Vader's return, and wow, we're finally back to planet-level Star Wars. And also, while a lot of people say that Vader should have won, and are probably gonna bring it up in even more comments that I'm just gonna ignore, the debate's been going back and forth for years, with the episode most likely being made during the time where people thought Obito won a hard-fought victory, whereas Vader beating Obito with seemingly little difficulty was much more recent in comparison, not really being massively agreed upon until a couple months before the episode was announced. But then again, I still gotta talk about the conclusion. conclusion and it needs to make sense, but it's sort of wrong by the episode's logic. There's this black box in Vader's analysis that brings up a speed feat involving Luke outspeeding someone who could process information within 6.1 picoseconds. Even if you want to argue, they didn't give a number, so it doesn't matter. The previous episode does give a number for how fast you would need to be reacting within picosecond time, and if you divided that number by 6.1, then you would get this number. This is crucial because Obito was placed at vaguely faster than light. But even if we highball that and say that Obito was 2 times faster than light, or even if we highball that even further and say that Obito was in the far more common 4 times FTL, Vader would still be significantly faster. Though to be fair, they did bring up Gaara's sand speed in a black box. I know what that means, and I'm also aware that it makes the speed gap much smaller. They didn't give a number on that, and unlike with Vader, you couldn't possibly predict what that number would be. But even ignoring all of that, I still have many problems with the conclusion. Like, there's this black box where they say Vader resisted soul absorption exclusively with a conscious use of a specific ability. What ability? And why would Anakin, in a more powerful state, not be able to use it again? I feel like I'm gonna get some comments elaborating on what Death Battle's trying to mean by this, and if you're gonna do that, then thanks. I very much appreciate it. But I wanted Death Battle to go into detail about it. Oh, and also, the Infinite Tsukuyomi, the way that Obito wins, was relegated to a corner box for some reason. They're trying to argue that the Infinite Tsukuyomi has a massive amount of layers of hacks that Vader can't handle, but they just don't elaborate or go in depth with it. But instead, they bring up Vader's preference for lightsaber combat and end up repeating points that they already made with the Kamui and the Truth-Seeking Orbs, which, by the way, the former of which is outright contradicted by the animation because Vader kinda does escape Kamui's grasp through crushing Obito's eye, I'm aware, but it doesn't change the fact that he was still able to escape its pull with the Force, so I'm not sure why they would frame it as if he couldn't do that. This conclusion has the exact same issue that I've seen in conclusions like in Wally vs. Archie Sonic, for example. Regardless of what argument you're trying to make, you cannot waste time! So much for going easy, I guess. But like, I'm only this frustrated because the animation and the music, that's no Moon. That track has been growing a lot more on me over the years. I love how it utilizes the Uchiha motif. I really like how it makes the fight feel depressing while still fitting the action phenomenally. And like, the emotional beats and the overall animation and cinematography are just amazing. It's just the research, man. It was not presented well at all. And the analyses were just not as interesting as I would have wanted. So I kind of have to give this a 77 out of 100. Sure, it's my least favorite of the Ghost Jedi trilogy, but it's still a very well written and well animated episode. I just couldn't get into it as much as other people did. Wait, hang on. This episode's music has a vibraphone in it? Okay, 84 out of 100. Seriously, people, normalize having vibraphones in your music. It's okay. I was never gonna actually give it a 77. I wanted to be hyperbolic for the sake of it. You know me. I knew it all along, braggers. I knew that this episode was gonna happen in the season. Anyways, remember when Ben said that he would not do this matchup because of how big of a stomp it was?
She got strong enough to destroy
It was a stomp in Raven's favor. Though yes, Ben does explain that it was mainly due to the fact that he didn't know too much about Raven during the production of Raven vs. Twilight, and he eventually did see merit in doing the matchup after giving the idea of second glance. And honestly, there's a line in the conclusion that I'm pretty sure references this.
Perhaps that's surprising, since Raven's reputation hardly matches that of the almighty Phoenix.
Though going into the analysis, Gene's analysis just gives me nothing. Parker's editing style, look, I defended it in Rocket's rundown because it was at least enticing, but it doesn't work for me here. This is where I can see the problems people had with it. This one's mostly just full panels, slowly being panned, and while it's definitely not bad editing, it makes the analysis kinda dull with how minimal the transitions are. Also, there's this literal JPEG of White Phoenix, knowing that there are transparent renders of that same image. It's that easy. Though I do need to point out that he would get far better with comic book editing in his next job, so I'm not gonna dock too many points from my final score. Besides, most of my problems with the analysis come from the writing anyway. They hype up the Phoenix Force as a cosmic god who wants to destroy all of existence, but they really don't go into a whole lot of detail about Gene's pacifism and kind personality, which is like the key thing that makes the dynamic interesting. It's not all bad news though. They do cover her childhood trauma fine enough, but they fall short in every other category of her character. I will will say this analysis has some other good stuff though, like the information about the Phoenix in mythology, Boomstick seeing no problem with Jocelyn getting possessed by the Phoenix Force, and the post-edit about how Jean died again during the episode's production. I saw this referenced in the G1 blog, and I didn't think it was gonna get referenced in the final episode, but they did, and I couldn't be happier. Although Parker completely misuses the GTA wasted sound effect. Rip Bozo. As for Raven's analysis, it was somehow less interesting than her previous one, and it wasn't even that good to begin with. I did appreciate them adding more of her story here, but it feels so spread out, and instead it feels like they're taking a respect thread and sprinkling her story in different parts of the rundown. They start off with some of her abilities, and then eventually they stop for a few minutes before talking about more of her abilities. It does not flow very well, and the poor pacing also makes the story beats they cover fall flat because there was straight up no build up for them. I'll give some credit to Parker for making the editing more engaging than he did in Jean's rundown. This one has faster cuts and more frequent uses of different clips. But like, what the hell happened with the music selection? They described the unkindness form like this, and yet they're playing something you would hear in a coffee shop? Why even? But to be fair, there is one big praise I can give it. We get Mecha Goose Howard speaking English. No idea why Boomstick says gooses after previously giving Wiz a scolding on how geese is pronounced, but at the end of the day, it's Cyber Goose. Everyone loves the Cyber Goose. In fact, I'll just say this right now, if Digital Ty makes an hour-long video essay on why he loves Cyber Goose, I will actually Venmo him $500 personally. But until then, let's talk about this fight. Given how critical I was of Raven's characterization in Raven vs. Twilight, there were a lot of people reasonably curious as to how I felt about Raven's characterization here. And at least I can say it's Raven this time. I'm happy to see that Rina-chan reprises her role as Raven. Unlike last time, she at least sounds like Raven. But she doesn't quite act like Raven. And it's mostly because of this part not even a minute in.
What's the matter? Afraid of the dark.
Red flag. Big red flag for me. When I saw this in the sneak peek, it made me worry that Raven was going into her dark form for no reason. Guess what happened shortly after that scene? Wow, how riveting. But you know what? Jean actually has it worse. Like, it doesn't have much to do with the voice. I don't hate it. And apparently this was Corey Petit's lifelong dream, so I'm happy that she got to cross something off of her bucket list. But as for her characterization, the way that the fight starts...
Hey, Johnny. I'ma let you finish, but I need to say something first.
The demon inside you is too strong to be left alive. I'm sorry. This is for the good of the universe.
Jean, honey, come here real quick. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind? You are the last person to tell someone that their inner demons are too dangerous to be left alive!
Okay, I think he's done. But yeah, why is she antagonizing Raven in the first place? Why was the setup not Jean seeking help from Raven, knowing that she's an empath and she also has inner demons to work with? Yes, it would have had the whole, hey, can you help me? Yes, let's fight it out for no reason. And yeah, that would have been weird, but at least it would have been a case of Death Battle going, hey, we need to have them acting at least a little bit out of character because, well, you know, this is Death Battle and we just gotta give them a reason to fight. But here, they intend on making Jean the full-on antagonist of this scenario, which to be fair, isn't automatically a bad idea, even in a matchup like Phoenix versus Raven. But the problem is that she's a voluntary antagonist, which completely goes against the root of her character. And on top of that, they give her the White Phoenix form, which even Death Battle says gives her full control over the Phoenix itself, which includes mental control. She often tries to reason with the Phoenix to prevent violence, but the fact that she stays the antagonist the whole time, even in her White Phoenix form, that just goes against her character. I don't know why they're having Raven act as a hero when Raven going into her dark form for no reason honestly proves her right. Really think about this. This is Phoenix versus Raven. Two characters who are normally kind, sympathetic, and are actively against violence, at least when written at their best, and they were gonna have Phoenix, or at least the Phoenix Force, acting as the overall antagonist of this episode, with Raven as the winner, and they have Raven saying this.
No, I'll take this pain from you.
So I feel like the emotional ending potential should have written itself. That scene I just played earlier, that shows to me that they really wanted to have an emotional ending, but the thing is, nothing was built up to it. The progression of Raven in this death battle is all like, I will not let you burn my home to ashes, randomly becomes Dark Raven. Now I will take this pain from you. How dare you call me the daughter of a demon? And if you're trying to make her the hero of the story, it would have made more sense to have had a prior scene where Raven notices what the Phoenix is doing to Jean, taps out of her Dark Raven form, and then tries to save Jean. You know, a la Magneto versus Tetsuo. Hell, you could even argue that the scenario that Hulk versus Broly tried to go for would have fit perfectly for Jean versus Raven, but this was just the worst way to go about it. You might as well have given both characters a gun at that point. And I really don't get why they have to make Raven's W feel cathartic when, like, it wasn't even built up. They say she is not a daughter of a demon, but the only other time where that was referenced was at the beginning. But, like, Trigon is a demon. What do you mean you're not the daughter of a demon? Yes, you fucking are. If I remember correctly, the entire point of your arc is that you would overcome being the daughter of a demon, not that you were the daughter of something that's not a demon. Like, what the are you going on about and why? I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This is the worst character writing Death Battle has done in a while. In fact, as far as modern Death Battle goes, I'd say that this is the second worst behind Deku versus Asta. Not only do you have one of the kindest characters being treated like a maniac for no reason, but you have two of the kindest comic book characters being treated like a maniac for no reason. The best case scenario is that it's accurate to the characters when they're written poorly. But like, who wants to see these characters written poorly aside from no one that likes these two? And for the record, I don't even like Phoenix that much. I don't think she's a bad character or anything. She's just not one of my all-time favorites. But I would have liked to have seen her portrayed better than this. Okay, I'm sorry I've been acting real angry about this, but the character writing really is the worst thing about it. But I will admit, this isn't a horrible episode because of it. It does have other good things. I do think that the escalation is perfectly fine. There is this silly looking telepath scene, which is vague, but I get the idea behind it. I'm pretty sure this was supposed to be Jean winning the mind struggle to where Raven's brain is damaged just enough to where it unleashes her Dark Raven form. But the fact that it's not communicated at all is a major failing of the scene. But otherwise, I really like these transformation scenes. The Dark Phoenix one especially, with Corey's scream of pain subtly transitioning into a maniacal laugh as she transforms into Dark Phoenix with this amazing design and all of these cool and badass fire effects. And yeah, in general, the visuals are unironically some of the best of the season. And of course, I gotta talk about this animator. This wasn't the first animation he worked on that was Stitch vs. Rocket, but it's the one that really got people respecting him. Say hello to Moro. And as tradition, let's go over the major animators of Death Battle. Jordan Lange was amazing at animating very fast movements and attacks. Torian Crawford had standout choreography and dynamic camera movements. Luis Cruz had a lot of personality with naturally fitting humor and good pacing. Devil Artemis and the rest of the Blender team have sublime visuals and impeccable character acting. Origin the PogChamp is a master of rigging movements and facial expressions. And as for Moro, you know how Death Battle has a lot of these hand-drawn shots, like what Jerky would work on? This guy isn't just bridging the gap, he is the bridge. And it's made of metal stronger than titanium and steel combined. Look at Raven's soul self here. I love these goopy textures it has. It makes the effect come to life. And the Phoenix Force? This one already looked really nice, but this one? This is impressive. I love how it's lit, and it actually looks real. Like, it looked real. And not to mention all the telekinesis auras and the hand-drawn effects, this fight is a visual treat for the eyes. No way around it. But of course, you can't just have style, you need substance, and sadly, there's not a whole lot of other substance. Like, there's this sword slash which looks pretty jank. Her arms apparently switch sides on the same perspective. Like, how does that happen? I feel like this is an animation trick, but something tells me that's not actually the case, and this really is just an error. And then when Dark Phoenix grabs Raven, we're suddenly in space. I mean, supposedly this is another illusion like the Xavier Institute, but it's kinda random, not gonna... And then Jean clones herself to fire a concentrated laser at Raven, who responds by picking up a moon to destroy the clones. I really like this idea, but this should have been a wide shot, bruv. It's Thanos versus Darkseid all over again. But at least with that episode, you could make a case that they were increasing their sizes. Can't do that here. I wish it utilized more of their powers. I guess Raven wasn't that shafted. In fact, she technically uses the same amount of powers as last time, even if most of them are different. But Jean kinda was. I know this is how she normally fights, but her rundown gave her all of this, and this, And after Wanda vs. Zatanna, which while didn't quite tap into the potential of their movesets or magic, it still gave us quite a bit of fun action and choreography that made me enjoy the fight more than most people. So here I feel like it was a downgrade even in comparison to not just that episode, but also Strange vs. Fate. Especially since that episode still felt like it had more going on in terms of action. But this is the first time where I actually felt like it was doing the bare minimum with its potential, aside from maybe the Golden Raven scene, but that's it. Oh, and there's this awkward slow-mo shot where it's literally just her sprite jump cutting with cross dissolves. Like, what is this, man? What are you doing? Oh, but then we get back to Earth where Jean supposedly incinerates Raven, but then her golden form rips out of her corpse and steals the rage from Jean, turning her into White Phoenix. This is something I wished we saw with Raven much earlier, but I'm still happy that it's here for Jean. And then we get to the white hot room with a really cringy line, and she's calling out to other X-Men for some reason. Like, didn't the analysis say that she has total control of this room or something? Why is she worried about Raven doing anything? I guess her worry is justified because, sadly, Raven just one-shots for no reason. I do like the kill, the bright cyan colors and various particle effects followed by Corey's godlike death scream, and even the shot of the Phoenix Force desperately trying to protect Jean to no avail, all blend together so nicely. Especially with this shot of Raven blowing out what's left of the Phoenix Force. The silent atmosphere makes it a very cool hand-drawn shot, just giving her a sweet death instead of something so over the top. But then there's this final shot where Raven says that she's home? Like, what's this supposed to mean? The most I can guess is that it's a reference to how she assumed Jean was going to burn her home to ash. But like, is that really what you're gonna work off of? Her Daughter of Azeroth line makes me believe this, but funnily enough, that line also makes little sense. Even ignoring all of the characterization issues I mentioned earlier, Jean did nothing to prompt her saying this. Or maybe it's just that Raven is referencing how she escaped the White Hot Room, which would mean that this line is trying way too hard to sound grandiose when it's not even that impressive of a line. So it's like, what's with the seemingly emotional weight? I mean, I guess it's representative of Raven being the underdog here, but like, there were people who unironically believed that Raven was gonna win, so what the hell? As for the conclusion, it's fine. It's like with Vedito, where I personally disagree with the outcome, but I can respect and understand Death Battle's argument. And unlike Vedito, it's still correct by the episode's logic. I heard that some of Phoenix's resistances were quote-unquote ignored. I've never really liked saying this, so I'm not going to, and I'm not knowledgeable on the debate to confirm or deny that, though I do think some elaboration would have been nice, but I think being unable to destroy or even kill Raven's soul self makes their argument adequate. This episode is just not fun to talk about, easily being the lowest point of the season in my opinion, and not even the Teen Titans theme being referenced in Forevermore is able to help me like this episode more. So on the one hand, I don't think my grievances with this episode should be that surprising, but on the other hand, you might be surprised to see me giving this a 45 out of 100. I mean, it's still the best worst episode by far, but man, I just wish it didn't bastardize Jean and mischaracterize Raven again. However, when it's all said and done, Death Battle immediately gave me, well, I'm sure you know what's coming next.
There's something to be said about people who enjoy Berserk. If you just took two pools of people, the just like average human in Berserk fans statistically more likely to vape. People who enjoy Berserk, much higher chance to have owned pyramid bracelets. Absolute fact. The other side of this, Fire Emblem enjoyers, I can say, generalize them in a way. Inside jokes, horny on main. There's just certain things about Fire Emblem enjoyers that you can just, you know, call out. I'm not making a left or right argument. I'm just saying there's facts here, okay?
Well, I guess those facts have already been debunked.
That's right, braggers. This is my new favorite Death Battle episode of all time. Wow, it's almost like I made an entire hour-long analysis of this episode or something. I'm not gonna waste too much of your time here, so let's just get into it. I love Guts' analysis to death. It is so much better than his other one, because they actually characterize him instead of glorify all the darkness of Berserk, which, truth be told, speaking as someone who really likes Berserk, it's not as interesting as Death Battle randomly felt like making it out to be during the time, and they actually name drop all these other Berserk characters, making his character arc that much better in comparison comparison, highlighting the aspect that actually make Berserk a really great story, easily being the best redemption of any returner of this season, if not the entire show. And Dimitri's analysis is my favorite of the season. I love me some RPGs, I love me some Fire Emblem, I love me some Three Houses, and it has my favorite cutaway gag of the entire show, because it's just Three Houses discourse.
The secret sign of the golden deer.
And Herschel gets to flex his love of the Fire Emblem series with how he nuances the world, how he highlights Dimitri's character growth, and how he makes all of these other Fire Emblem characters prominent throughout the entire analysis, using subtle yet specific word choices to convey it all. I still wish that Lambert got a name drop, but what can you do? And the fight! It may be simple, and while Guts vs. Nightmare actually does kind of have an edge in how they destroyed trees, boulders, just with their sword swings, but this fight is better in every other way, highlighting Guts' tenacity much better than his older episode, Dimitri's more defensive fighting style being a subtle nod to the durability mechanic in Fire Emblem, the altered reference making the in-media res setup work completely for the episode, even if most people still don't like that the fight is in-media res, which... you should feel bad for that. And the down to the last one scene. And then the critical art with the best fake out of the show, where it makes you think that Guts survived the attack, but he actually didn't. And it makes the abruptness work to its favor, given how each shot was framed. I really don't get the criticism of how the ending felt too fast, or that they rushed through it. Dimitri was knocked to the ground for a full ass second. How slow did you want it to be? And then you have the final line from Dimitri, which perfectly encapsulates his character arc, which has been subtly foreshadowed throughout the beginning as he finds out what drove Dimitri's slaughter.
By the way, I would also like to give a shout out to this sound effect right here. You probably didn't hear it, but let me just play this backwards and see if you recognize anything. Did you hear that? Here's the sound one more time.
And not only is the conclusion really good and in-depth, in spite of people still being adamant about the scaling, which if you're one of the people who insists on commenting, they totally wanked Dimitri, they completely overhyped the Javelins of Light, the cutscene were framed differently than what Death Ground was describing. All I have to say is, but personally, I think it's really well made, really in-depth, and it subtly addresses the this is what Guts does every single day moment without calling immediate attention to it, which I guess that's what subtlety is. And it also has some of the most brilliant cohesion between animation and conclusion that the show has ever done, just outright. Though there are some people who don't really like the matchup that much, or at least they prefer other ideas for Guts, and some have even gone on the record saying that Death Battle exclusively did this for money.
We didn't change it from Claire. We were more so just between a couple different ideas. We went with Dimitri because we thought Fire Emblem is a franchise that also hadn't been in Death Battle yet, and we knew a lot of people wanted us to do Fire Emblem. We've been talking about this next episode like around the space for like all year. All of us have been so hyped for it. We're making sure that it is as badass and cool as it can be, and we have so many people working on that fight who are big fans of both series.
Well, that criticism's already been debunked. Now, it's time for the moment I'm sure you guys have been waiting for. You braggers have been long awaiting a 3D episode to get this score, so here it is. Guts vs. Dimitri gets a 1 out of 100. I'm kidding. 100 out of 100. Actually, no, f*** it. 101 out of 100. There we go. Given to a 3D episode. Go watch my video on this, as it does a far better job at explaining why this is the best Death Battle in my opinion, actually. Now never ask me for anything ever again. You know, looking back, I used to not be the biggest fan of this matchup, but it's not because of the reasons you think. I really like Jean. He's my second favorite JLA member behind Wally. And as for the Silver Surfer, he's just whatever. I don't hate him, I just never really grew up with any media related to him. Though I will say, I am retroactively happy that they did this instead of Martian Manhunter versus Piccolo, because they sure are green aliens, I guess. But at least it's better than John's analysis had a weird start with them not even showing his background tab until 2 minutes in, and then his feats tab arrives not even a minute after the fact. I think I get the idea behind this. I feel like Joshua was trying to go for another unconventional structure that elaborates on how his battles affected him mentally, but that doesn't exactly justify the feats panel being so close to the beginning. Plus, they weirdly retread old ground here, like with the Superman breaking infinity feat, mainly because it was 2 episodes after Raynix. To their credit, they still have new feats from him, even if it's mainly just surviving a punch from God, and the other feat that I'll get into later, but a lot of his feats are just, oh, he could keep up with the other JLA members, or hold his own against other villains. But this analysis still has plenty of great moments. I do like the Mixie's Pitalik outtake. It's really not that hard to say. Hey man, I just really like it when people include their outtakes. It's funny. But when they start to focus on his mind and telepathic feats, it gets good. Like really, really good actually. Gradually going over his most impressive feats and then going into his weakness to fire. And the cutaway has Wiz deducing that his weakness to fire, at least when taking into account the time where he was tricked into thinking he was catching fire, was psychosomatic. Ooh, is that Wiz going into some science here? Which for those who don't know what that means, psychosomatic means based on internal conflict or stress. And yeah, that perfectly describes Jean's weakness to fire, at least with their interpretation of it. Oh, and also this.
I'll be a living god!
Ah, Joshi, I see that you're a man of culture as well. The stress in question most likely refers to the death of his race, which is why they immediately cover it after that hypothesis, which leads into their coverage of the history of the Martian's weakness to fire. It forced Jean to cut off the connection to his people just to survive the fire. And then that's where they cover his loneliness, as well as this moment here.
His only solace being shape-shifting into his lost loved ones to convince himself they were still alive.
Oh my god! Jesus, John! That is so sad!
That cry from Boomstick? Unironically the best delivery Chad has ever given. It's not like in Blake vs. Mikasa where it low-key sounds condescending and fake. Here, it sounds legitimate, like Boomstick genuinely feels sad for Jean. And then that leads into the feat where his sadness single-handedly prevents his entire alien race from moving on to the afterlife. That's... That is how you combine character and feats. And then we get to the ending note, which is about how he learns to cope with his loneliness to embrace his new life as the heart and soul of the JLA, where he, and I quote, rose through the ashes. I actually just welled up right now. That's just beautiful writing. Just got to me and made me love Jean even more than I already do. And then we get to the Silver Surfers rundown. It's not as good to me, but that's mainly because of personal attachment in the fact that I don't really have much for Silver Surfer. But I do appreciate them covering his survivor's guilt, his time as Galactus' herald, and his efforts to redeem himself and defend everyone's right to live. But the structure is even worse than in Jean's analysis, admittedly. Like they do that thing where they show the feast tab less than a minute after his background tab. And again, I get the idea, but the structure and flow still feel clunky to me, especially with how they keep going in and out of story and versus stats. Like, I guess you could argue it's technically consistent, but it just doesn't work for me. Because here it feels like they're going, he's a tragic figure. Oh wait, we forgot to mention some more abilities, so here they are. And I also thought that the surfer lingo running gag was cute, and while I didn't find the cutaway funny, I like how Wiz eventually agrees with Boomstick on Norn being righteous even after debunking the surfer analogies. I will say here, Parker's editing is a massive improvement from Raynix. Jean's analysis had some nifty edits, Funko Pop Go Burr, but Norn's rundown is where it truly shines with how he edits the comic panels and make the visuals more engaging. Like shoutouts to this one right here. Man, that is just some smooth rigging, my guy. But then we go into the fight. Let's talk about the setup first. So, you know how people have criticized death battle fights for having it start for basically no reason or a very poor reason? What if there was a death battle where that was the point? They're being forced to fight one another, but the entire idea behind the fight is them trying to figure out what that reason is. Let's take a look at this opening shot right here. First of all, love the film noir aesthetic. Second of all, I really like these photographs of deceased Marvel and DC combatants. It really adds a lot of nuance to what makes this fight dynamic so interesting. Their goals aren't really to kill each other. Jean's goal is trying to figure out what Norn is hiding from him, and Norn is actively avoiding his interrogation because he himself doesn't know what's going on. And nearly every single line of dialogue is relevant for this idea.
I must end this.
This line means that he has to find the answer as soon as possible because Jean is clearly not interested in waiting on him to find it. So Norn's solution is to just get it out of the way. It does lead into this chase scene, which is kinda dull, but it's revealed that Jean lures him into a trap with the clones in an attempt to wear down Norn's mental defenses even harder and force him to break down, leading into this line here.
There is no use in hiding. I can feel your presence.
This means that he has to confess the sad truth that he doesn't know, but he's gotta keep fighting anyway. And then we get to the dragon transformation, and it has some amazing hand-drawn animation. Though I will admit I don't fully understand what this was supposed to mean, though I do like how Norn's ice powers interact with it, freezing Jean and forcing him to revert back to his normal appearance. And then Norn uses his matter manipulation to catch Jean's psionic blast, morph it into a large projectile, and throw both it and Jean into the sun so that he can't fly away from it, leading into this exchange.
Nothing can best Martian might. Your will is admirable, but will alone is not enough.
Jean's line is a nod to his fire weakness, as well as how the analysis has helped him give some tolerance. And then Norn's line is referencing his ability to resist fire as much as he had is not enough to overpower the power cosmic. But then we get to the most brilliant line in the entire episode.
Feel the pain.
First of all, I adore Paul Guyot's delivery. It doesn't sound too cruel, but it sounds more desperate, as if he wants to get this over with. And second of all, it's also a reference to his ability to force others to feel pain, meaning that he has to force Jean to succumbing to his fire vulnerability. But then we get to the death. This is the part where the answer for why they're fighting becomes clear, in that it's impossible for them to figure it out. And that disappoints them even more when you realize that these are two of the best telepaths in all of Marvel and DC respectively. And with that in mind, combined with how the power cosmic works, with how it gives him cosmic awareness, it nudges that gap of them being self-aware without directly breaking the fourth wall. Rather, it's more that they're poking it in a way. And that's what makes it so disappointing, because Norn especially is able to know about this kind of stuff, but this is one of the rare instances where he doesn't. The reason why he was avoiding Jean's interrogation was because he didn't have an answer at all. And given his pacifism, he actively didn't want to fight Jean, let alone kill him. That's also emblematic with this line right here.
I hope you can live with the uncertainty.
They really were fighting because this is Death Battle, and neither one of them were aware of it. It also has some really subtle moments like the green aura surrounding Norn's head slowly fading away, and during Jean's pain of the sun, he becomes engulfed in a blue aura reminiscent of Norn's powers. That same blue is also affecting the entire sun, which quietly destroys planets during Norn's monologue, giving more emphasis on the characters rather than the destruction. This is yet another one of those he's just like me moments. It's like they said, they possess the same knowledge of the fact that they don't know why they're fighting. But it's like what Jean says, I hope you can live with the uncertainty. It's his farewell to Norn. Obviously, Jean is going to struggle through the pain being forced on him, but as he melts, and as Norn says that there's likely something worthy in a battle, Jean gets one last word.
Myria.
And this hand-drawn animation displays the part where Jean stops struggling and eventually accepts his death, embracing his reunion with Myria. And finally, we get one last shot where it just says, the end. There's nothing else to say. It's just the end. This is what makes the fight really special to me. I can complain about the fight not going all out with the film noir aesthetic. Given everything else, given that it feels like every single line was building up to this one moment, I can overlook this aspect because of how the episode fully embraces to being based around this one moment. It really does feel like the best sad ending that the show has ever done. I still prefer Gus versus Dimitri's ending because of what it says to me, as well as how it gives Gus the perfect send-off. But for being an episode solely based around it, this one is better on a technical level, especially with how much effort was put into it, and especially how the conclusion follows suit with it, where Boomstick is actively depressed by how they're forcing these beautiful characters to fight one another. Again, he's legitimately sad. It's just such a beautiful moment. Anyways, that's everything I like about the conclusion, so let's talk about the problems. Yeah, it's wrong by its own logic. It really did just say, lol, power cosmic, I ain't gotta explain it.
The Surfer has had his memories erased and his emotions manipulated by Galactus, so it would stand to reason that Jean could pose a mental threat to the Surfer.
Did Death Battle just compare Jean to Galactus? Did Death Battle just compare Martian Manhunter to f***ing Galactus? I mean, okay, it's technically not the most unreasonable thing in the world given where they scaled his telepathy powers, but at the same time, if Death Battle wants to argue that Jean's telepathic powers were comparable to Galactus in that he could manipulate his memories, erase them entirely, and all that other stuff, it still begs the question, why didn't he? I know that Norn is more powerful than Jean, but they forgot to give Norn anything that goes up to multiversal like what they gave Jean. And also, they did not convince me that Norn's regen was better than Jean. They say Jean can regenerate from nothing while Norn can regenerate from being blown to pieces. Yeah, that's definitely impressive. which is why it doesn't make much sense when they say that Jean cannot kill Norin. My opinion on this episode has a lot in common with Vader versus Obito. As unfathomably brilliant the fight is written, the analyses weren't the most interesting thing in the world, and I took way too many problems with the conclusion to call this a supreme episode. Though I will admit I like this episode just a tad bit more because I found the analyses a tad bit more interesting, and I thought that the emotional impacts in this episode were stronger. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if I realized that I barely scratched the surface on how good this fight is. I am fully ready to like this episode even more on a rewatch, and technically, I kind of already have. I wasn't that impressed on a first viewing, but after this revisit, 85 out of 100. It's really, really good, and really underrated too, and I only expected to like it more and more over time.
Hey there. Wanna make another deal?
It's funny how dumb you are.
You know, the battle between Raven and Phoenix is just two chicks with daddy issues going at it. Wait, what happened to my voice? Oh, Bill, get out of my body, you dumb fuck!